Okay, I'll have to do this again. Uh, this is from the last video on the outer darkness that I didn't read the entire parable. But I'm going to go ahead and do that because I just feel the need to do it. Before I read the parable, though, I'm going to read the a lot of the times that Jesus gave these parables, he was addressing the Pharisees primarily, although it could be a general. I mean, it specifically was to the Pharisees, but yet it was still something that it was all encompassing at the same time. That's the best way I can explain it. Anyway, so I'm going to back up to Matthew 21. The parable of the wedding feast is chapter 22. But anyway, to show that how Jesus was addressing the Pharisees, in chapter 21, verse 23, and when he was come into the temple, the chief priests and the elders of the people came unto him. That was the Pharisees. The chief priests and the elders of the people came unto him as he was teaching, and said, By what authority dost thou these things? And who gave thee this authority? In other words, who do you think you are, Jesus? That was, again, from the chief priests and the elders, the Pharisees. They were wanting to know, who are you? Okay. The reason I'm looking up here is because I taped this before and only got 6 minutes out of it, so I don't know. I don't know if it's going to cut out again or what. Anyway, so and then another interesting thing over here in verse 31, Jesus is speaking to the Pharisees again. Actually, he's going into he does another parable, the parable of the husbandman. Okay, down in verse 31, Jesus says to them, Verily I say unto you, Pharisees, verily I say unto you that the publicans and the harlots go into the kingdom of God before you. Okay? The publicans and the harlots, the prostitutes, the whores, go into the kingdom before you do, Pharisees. You know, I mean, he's not saying that they're not going to go in. He just said these other people are going to go in before you. So anyway, that's kind of interesting. So anyways, going into the one more thing before I go into the parable of the wedding feast. In verse 45 of chapter 21, and when the chief priests and the Pharisees had heard his parables, they perceived that he spake of them. I commented on that. I read that in the last video. And when the chief priests and the Pharisees had heard his parables, they perceived that he spake of them. I mean, they weren't stupid. They knew who he was talking about. He was talking about them. Okay, so that's what this parable is about. This marriage dinner is about. It's about the Pharisees. Okay, and it's really about everyone also. Okay, but it's primarily about the Pharisees. And I'll read them if you read 46 too. But when they sought to lay hands on him, Jesus, when they sought to lay hands on him, they feared the multitude, because they took him for a prophet. Okay, this will show you that. I mean, they knew they knew their limitations. I mean, they had enough sense to be fearful of the, fearful of the multitude. Okay, anyway. Chapter 22, Matthew, verse 1. And Jesus answered and spake unto them again by parables. Again, he's speaking to the Pharisees primarily. Jesus answered and spake unto them again by parables, and said, The kingdom of heaven is like unto a certain king, which made a marriage for his son, and sent forth his servants to call them that were bidden to the wedding. Okay? And sent forth his servants to call them that were bidden, to call them that were invited to the wedding, and they would not come. Okay? This is speaking of the Pharisees. Jesus is calling these people, and again, this can mean, this doesn't necessarily have to be the Pharisees, but he is addressing the Pharisees. They wouldn't come. They wouldn't listen. He invited them to the wedding, but they didn't want to come. Verse 4, Again he sent forth other servants, saying, Tell them which are bidden, Behold, I have prepared my dinner. My oxen and my fatlings are killed, and all things are ready. Come unto the marriage. Okay? Verse 5, But they made light of it. Okay, they made fun of it. They didn't take it serious. But they made light of it and went their ways, one to his farm and another to his merchandise. Verse 6, And the remnant took his servants and entreated them spitefully and slew them. Okay, that's speaking of those that are, all the prophets and those that predicted Christ's coming and everything. That they killed them. Verse 7, But when the king heard thereof, he was wroth, he was angry, mad. He sent forth his armies and destroyed those murderers and burned up their city. Verse 8, Then saith he to his servants, The wedding is ready, but they which were bidden were not worthy. Those that were invited were not worthy. Verse 9, Go ye therefore into the highways, and as many as you shall find, bid them to the marriage, invite them to the marriage. Verse 10, So the servants went out into the highways, and gathered all that, as many as they found, both bad and good. Both bad and good. That's everybody. Everybody's invited to the wedding. The bad and the good, the bad, and the ugly. And the wedding was furnished with guests. Verse 11, And when the king came in to see the guests, he saw there a man which hath not on a wedding garment. Okay? He wasn't clothed properly. He didn't have on the right. He wasn't prepared. He didn't have it together. It reminds me of an episode of Seinfeld where Jerry he's trying to get into this club. I think it was called the Friars Club. I'll have to look. Maybe I'll find that clip and post it. Anyway, it was this Friars Club, and he couldn't get into the club unless he had on a Friars jacket, and he was like a prospective member and stuff, and he was wanting to talk to somebody in there, but he had to have on a certain jacket, had a garment to get in. Okay? And it's the same way today. If you're trying to get into some, whatever, a club or a restaurant that requires you to have a tie and a jacket or something, you have to have that on, or you can't partake of the. They'll cast you out. Cast you into outer darkness. Let's see. Yeah. And when the king came to see the guest, he saw there a man which had not on a wedding garment. Verse 12. And he saith unto him, Friend, how camest thou in hither, not having a wedding garment? and he was speechless. Okay. Now notice Jesus says here, and he said unto him, Friend. Now he didn't say, and he said unto him, you awful, dirty, wicked sinner, how camest thou in hither not having a wedding garment? He said, Friend. And he was speechless. Well, you would be speechless if you didn't. The wedding, for one thing, the wedding garment is being that of having the mind of Christ. And I'm not talking about being perfect like Christ. I'm talking about adhering to the mind of Christ, adhering to the nature and character of Christ, which is all the things that is Christ. His love, His mercy, His grace, His compassion, all the nature and character of Christ. That's the wedding garment. That's possessing the. That's like the Apostle Paul saying, put on the mind of Christ. Or let this mind be in you that was also in Christ Jesus. It's acquiring that mind. And it's a work in progress. It's something that you strive for, and eventually at some point you acquire it. Anyway, that's what the wedding garment is: having the mind of Christ, having the being born again in the Spirit of Christ. Which everyone, by the way, is going to possess. Even the Pharisees. Remember Jesus saying that the prostitutes and the tax publicans will enter into the kingdom before you. He didn't say they weren't going to enter in. He just said these other people are going to go in before you. One of the main things of putting on the mind of Christ is the putting away the ego, putting away the pride, putting away the arrogance, putting away that. Anyway, and again, that's a exercise of. That's a work that it has to be performed, and anyway, that's something that God has to instill in you to even acquire, to work towards. Okay. And he was speechless. I mean, what are you going to say? What are you going to say when, the king says to you, where's your wedding garment? Where's that mind of Christ? Where's that love? Where's that mercy? Where's that grace? And not just for the ones you like, not just for the ones you love. I mean, no. It's easy to like the ones that you like, right? It's easy to love the ones that love you. But what about someone beating you to death almost, and then spitting on you, and then nailing you to a cross? That'd be kind of hard to love somebody like that, wouldn't it? Yeah, Jesus said, forgive them. Okay, and he was speechless. 13. Then said the king to the servants, bind him hand and foot, and take him away, and cast him into outer darkness. There shall be weeping and gnashing of teeth. Again, the outer darkness is to be in error. The word darkness there means error. He didn't have on the proper attire. He didn't have on the mind of Christ. He was in error. And so that's what the outer darkness is. It's simply to be in error. It has nothing to do with being eternally tormented in outer darkness somewhere or in hell somewhere. It's simply acknowledging that you weren't prepared. You didn't have it. That's why when Jesus said that many shall say unto me in that day, Lord, Lord, have we not taught in your name, and in your name cast out devils, and in your name done many wonderful works? And he's going to say, I don't know you, because you don't have on the wedding garment. You're not prepared. You know? And again, that doesn't mean they're going to go to hell. It just means they got to go back and do it again. They got to decide. However God does that, I don't know. Whether we come back in another body or whatever, I don't know. I can't say. No one can say that for sure. No one can say that reincarnation isn't true. That God's going to do whatever it takes. God will utilize whatever that is. There shall be weeping and gnashing of teeth, and that would be well, weeping and gnashing of teeth is simply an expression of regret and sorrow. Let's say you've been in church for 50 or 60 years, and you were a Bible teacher or a preacher, or whatever, and then you're standing before Jesus, and He says, "Hey, I don't know you." "Oh, but Lord, I taught in Your name, and I did all these," that would make you want to weep and gnash your teeth. And then 14, for many are called, but few are chosen. The many that are called means invited. Many are invited, but few are chosen. There's first fruits and there's second fruits. The ones that are chosen are the first, and the others are second fruits. But all are coming in. And again, that's a person would have to read their whole Bible to, let me put it this way. A person would have to call on God to ask Him to reveal that to the person. That's the best way to do that, whether that's true or not. Whether all are going to be saved, that's something you would have to ask God to reveal that to you. So anyway, I just wanted to go ahead and read the whole parable instead of just that one little snippet out of it there. So.